and welcome to another fun-filled, exciting new episode of This is Metal with Joe Lawson. Now, tonight, Joe, this your suggestion. We're going to do a special show dedicated to the late great Nazareth singer Dan McCafferty. And Dan, like I said, recently passed, and so we're going to be posting this show probably like in the next 2 to 3 weeks, so people can hear it because the year is getting ready to wrap up. So why don't we start off with you telling us, I guess, the story of how you first became aware of Nazareth?
Honestly, probably the first time I think I remember hearing Nazareth and knowing that it was Nazareth.
Yeah.
Probably was after they released Hair of the Dog, the most popular album, because it was on the radio. And
yeah, you and me both.
Being played all of the time and stuff like that. So that was kind of my first introduction to them. And, of course I did that Hair of the Dog and cover bands. And I also did the song Changing Times in a cover band. And it was one of the hardest songs for me to sing because Dan's voice is just so unique and so energetic and powerful and gritty. And he has all this texture to his voice and all this uniqueness, and when you're playing in a cover band, that's the job. You got to try and sound like that band,
And
it was a difficult task, and that made me look a little bit more into who Nazareth was, And the guy's a great, phenomenal singer. I think he's underrated, highly underrated. And these guys are legends, Nazareth. How many other bands do you know? These guys have 25 fucking records out. 25 albums. I mean, that's quite a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And like 7 or 8 live albums, not on top of the 25.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think they got more albums than Iron Maiden out.
Probably so, yeah.
They've been around since the late 60s, early 70s, and the only thing people know about Nazareth, most people, when you say Nazareth, is the Hair of the Dog. That's it.
Yeah,
That's all they know.
Or Love Hurts. Love Hurts.
And of course that was a huge #1 hit for them. But strangely enough, it wasn't the song that they originally wrote.
Yes.
It was the Brothers song. So it wasn't even their track. They just blew it out of the park and did a phenomenal job on it. But I just think they're a phenomenal band, highly underrated. You could argue, I guess, whether they're metal or not.
Yeah.
They definitely have some heavier songs.
Sure.
And especially for the time, like we said, early 70s, metal was very different than it is today. So, but they were definitely, I include them in the pioneers, like UFO and Uriah Heep, Deep Purple, and all those other bands. To me, they're right in there with those guys,
And definitely Black Sabbath.
Great band.
And definitely Black Sabbath was probably one of the premier metal bands. I mean, Tony Iommi is credited with like creating that sound because of his injury with his fingers. And it's funny you bring up the fact that Love Hurts is not even a Nazareth original. Now, when most people hear of a song Love Hurts, they say, yeah, that's a Nazareth song. Now, a couple years ago when I did some research for some, I came across the fact, like you, that it was originally recorded by the Everly Brothers of all people. Now, here's a fun thing, which I'm going to do when we post the show. I'm going to post both the Nazareth version that everybody's heard countless times on the radio, and then the Everly Brothers. I mean, of course, the Everly Brothers was the original version, so that's where it originated from. But it does sound quite a bit different from the Nazareth song. But the interesting thing, Joe, my point I'm making here is even though that's a cover tune, when most people think of that song, they think of Nazareth. See, the band did such a great job of really owning that song, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you wouldn't know the difference if you just listened to it. You would think, oh, yeah, that's a great band. That was their song. Well, no, it was a cover song. But nonetheless, it went platinum. It was a huge hit. Yeah. And the song was on the Norwegian charts for 60 weeks.
Yeah, and
that's a long haul on the charts.
And then
long ride.
Of course, with the Hair of a Dog being the most popular song and album from throughout the band's entire career, they had obviously a little bit of controversy with that song because, first of all, there's the fact that most people, and I was guilty of this for many years, refer to the song as "Son of a Bitch" because of the lyric throughout the song. Oh, that must be called "Son of a Bitch," and part of the reason they had to rename it was because you couldn't have disc jockeys back in the day saying "son of a bitch" on the radio, so they changed it to "hair of a dog" because, as we all know, if you've ever heard what is a bitch is really a female dog. So it's I think Nazareth originally from Scotland, and being part of the UK, that was kind of a like a British kind of term, "hair of a dog," which has nothing to do with even a female dog. With alcohol, it was an alcohol term.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But I think it's kind of ironic too that Roger Glover worked with Nazareth on a couple of records, and excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay. Roger Glover worked with Nazareth on a couple of records, and he also worked with Judas Priest.
Yeah.
Judas Priest had a hard time working with Roger Glover. Things weren't really going real smooth and working real great in the studio with them. And it's not a dig at Roger, but it is what it is. Yeah. And the very next album, they decided Manny was going to do it. Manny Charlton. Yeah. And he produced "Hair of the Dog," which is the most popular album.
Yeah.
They had Roger Glover of Deep Purple, and they get one of the guys in the band to produce the record, and it's their most successful album to date.
And I think part of the reason for that, and you can tell me if you agree with this, being a musician that's reported yourself, Joe, I think oftentimes when it can go both ways, but oftentimes you have an outsider coming in to produce a band. Maybe they know nothing about the band. They just got hired to do the job, and they come in and they try to change the band, or they try to mold the band into something they really aren't, and the band is somewhat uncomfortable. Whereas you got a guy that maybe is in the band, he's one of the guys that writes the song. He knows a lot better than an outsider what the band should sound like, I would think.
Oh, sure, and he's in the band, so he's vested in it. So he's going to be passionate about it and try his best and work real hard to produce something really good,
Yeah.
For sure.
And then now, just to kind of give people a little idea of what we're talking about here. Now, William Daniel McCafferty, that was his, I guess, birth name, who was professionally known as Dan McCafferty, was born on October 14th, 1946, and he died at the age of 76 on November 8th, 2022, just recently, from COPD. And to further kind of touch on that, so he lived 76 years. He lived a pretty good life, I would say. But on August 29th, 2013, so this is, quite a number of years ago, Dan McCafferty announced his decision to leave Nazareth and retire from touring due to not having, I guess it was rumored at the time that he had a stroke or a heart attack, but that was not actually. He was on stage and he noticed he was having trouble breathing. And like when he tried to sing, you can imagine, I guess he was suffering from COPD at the time. So it happened more than once. He'd get up on stage, try to sing, as you can imagine, Joe, and he was having these little breathing attacks. And since it started happening over and over, he said, okay, I'm obviously, and I guess he went to a doctor, got diagnosed with COPD, which, even Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek, he ultimately died from that. So could you imagine being a singer and get up on stage?
Would be brutal.
Yeah. So that's kind of lets people know about, that's what he died of. And then, like you said, I had to kind of educate myself last night. I went and I was listening to some other songs, and there's this one song that I would say it's one of their earlier hits off, I think, one of the first two albums, called Dream On. And I'd say that track's as good as a power ballad, back in the day as Love Hurts, and for whatever reason, I guess Love Hurts, like you said, remained the band's biggest hit. I don't know why that song Dream On didn't get more of a push, but it really should have.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got a lot of great tracks and great albums. In '99, they had their original drummer, Daryl Sweet, died at age 51 of a heart attack. So now with Dan dying, Pete Agnew, the bass player, is the only remaining original member of Nazareth. Now, so I went and listened, I wasn't familiar with Dan's replacement.
Yeah.
Apparently, he sang in Crocus, and Geezer did something with Geezer Butler.
Okay. Wow.
So he's been around a little bit.
Yeah.
And good singer, but I listened to just a couple of tracks. I'm going to have to try and go find him doing some of the older Nazareth and see how he does. Yeah. But I didn't care for the new Nazareth. It's real bubblegummy, real pop sounding, kind of almost like a Green Day.
Yeah.
I mean, like a completely different band. I mean, and you know, the sad thing is there's thousands and thousands of people checking them out. You know, they get 180,000 hits on YouTube or whatever it is. You know, and then, you know, you go look at Dan McCafferty's Last Testament, his last album, his Dying Testament. Yeah. Literally.
Wow.
And it's got like 1,000 hits.
Yeah. And you know,
1,200 hits. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah. I mean, I think
unbelievable.
I think, you know, I mean, he was the guy with the golden voice. He was the original singer, and it's almost it's not impossible to find a singer to fill you know, huge shoes. I mean, like Van Halen, they did it with Sammy Hagar, and he was completely different from you know, David Lee Roth. But I think the difference there is that Sammy Hagar was very much a songwriter, and he came in and he kind of he continued to be what he was. He like Sammy Hagar didn't change who he was to join Van Halen. He kind of brought that into the band, and for whatever reason, it worked. I think the other thing, you could say Nazareth over the years had an identity crisis, because I agree with you that they're one of those bands, because they came from the 70s, they were all over the place. They did everything from you know, hard rock to power ballads and everything in between. And I think that's why a lot of people liked what they were doing. But like especially when you get to the 80s and the 90s, and all the lineup changes, I think, you know, like many bands at the time, throughout the 1980s and 1990s, they saw their popularity start to decline because of the change of the musical landscape, and because the fact that the band had gone through so many lineup changes, like I said, you know. So, you know, maybe in the 80s, they're like, okay, everybody's like, this is a band from the 70s. Oh, we got to kind of step it up. We kind of got to sound like all these other 80s bands. And I think, like a lot of bands.
You know, every band has that point in their career. I think, especially in professional bands where they're searching, they're trying to stay on top. And again, like I've said before, you know, you're in a different league when it's assigned to a major label or something like that, because they pretty much own you. Any other place that you would go and have a lawyer look at this contract, most of the stuff that they're demanding would be illegal.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Joe.
Labels got away with insane demands, and they controlled a lot of what these bands did. Now, that's not to say that they didn't know what they were doing, because they did know what they were doing. And they made a shit ton of money doing it over and over and over again, band after band after band, year after year after year, genre after genre after genre. So they got good at it. They knew how to put these packages together and make it work.
Now here's the thing too about.
So it was like you gave your soul away, you signed your soul away. Yeah, that's where that saying came from. I mean, because that's literally what a lot of these bands were doing. So sometimes when you hear something from a band and you say, what the fuck are they doing here? You know, why did they put a record out like this? You know, it isn't because necessarily that they wanted to. They're being guided or told that they have to go this direction, or that the label wanted them to experiment and do something like this instead because it's more popular, you know, or get rid of this guy and hire this guy, or, you know, they're not at the liberty or freedom to make their own choices until they can write their own ticket. You know, they become a bigger name band, you know, if you're lucky enough to do that.
See, and that's the thing with a band like Nazareth. Okay, so it was actually 2013 when Dan McCafferty decided to leave Nazareth, and he was going to retire, you know, and wasn't going to be constantly touring like he was for most of his career. And so Nazareth, they haven't come out and made any big announcement. Okay, we're going to call it quits. I don't think there's really a need to, because they've been doing it without Dan since 2013. But that's the thing. You got one original guy. And you probably got the record. Look, guys, keep the Nazareth name, okay? It means something. It means something. We don't really care who's in the band, but we're going to call it Nazareth. And that's the thing. And so there is a certain thing with the branding. And it's funny you bring up the record company, because here's something else I came across in my research. Also, because of the band's decline in popularity, Joe, at the time, many of their 1980s and 1990s releases were not released in the U.S. or the UK. The band, though, remained popular throughout Germany and other European countries. So during the 80s and 90s, many of these releases they were putting out were not even released in the U.S. or in certain parts of Europe. But Europe, they remained, very popular. And so you go to some countries, like I guess mostly in the European, because they were still very popular in Europe, so they'd go over to Europe and probably not do too many shows over here in the U.S. So a lot of the stuff wasn't even known over here, wasn't even released, but they would just release it back in Europe. And that's a lot of, you even see that a lot of times these days with bands.
Yes, well, especially them being a Scottish band, too. That was their area, their side of the pond, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, a lot of bands have had success, over here in the U.S., from Europe and vice versa. But it doesn't always work the same. It's not a cut and dry formula. And I think their biggest hit here in the U.S. undoubtedly was the Hair of the Dog, released in 1975. But speaking of Hair of the Dog, Guns N' Roses covered Hair of the Dog on the Spaghetti Incident, which a lot of people probably know. But maybe some people don't know that Britney Fox also covered Hair of the Dog on their second album.
Okay.
So both bands covered Nazareth on different occasions.
Now Joe.
Axl Rose actually tried to get Nazareth to play his wedding, but Nazareth turned him down.
I'd love to know why, but even especially you think in 1993, Guns N' Roses is much better than Nazareth. I mean, you'd think, if anything, it'd be good press for a band. I'd love to know, did they have a better paying gig that day or what?
Right, yeah, something was up there. Yeah, but also they released a song called Crazy, a suitable case for treatment on popular film Heavy Metal.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So if you watch that or look that up, that's a little fun side note. Nazareth put a song on that, and that was, I think, from their album Malice in Wonderland.
Oh, wow. And now, Joe, at the top of this episode today, you mentioned that you had covered, I guess, at some of your shows, the song Changin' Times. And I listened to that, and it kind of gave me I got like an AC/DC vibe from that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great tune.
And then another song I was listening to, I don't know if you've heard it, is called This Flight Tonight. And what's amazing about that, besides, me kind of digging the song, is come to find out that was originally a song done by Joni Mitchell, of all people.
Yeah. So, just like
Beverly
Priest covered a Joni Mitchell, Diamonds and Rust.
Yeah. Like songs that like Joni Mitchell, people don't know, is kind of like a folky kind of hippie singer from back in the 60s. And again, not having ever heard the original Diamonds and Rust, I just can't picture Judas Priest covering a folk singer, but very much like Nazareth. They own the song, and so when people think of Diamonds and Rust, they don't even think of Joni Mitchell. They think of Judas Priest. Some bands are really good at doing these covers.
Yeah. Some bands have had more success doing covers than they did their own stuff.
Yeah. I mean, one of the bands that I really have come to love over the last couple of years is the Dead Daisies, and we're one of those bands. It doesn't really seem, for whatever reason, to matter who's in the band, this week or this year. They put out great music, and they become known for doing some great covers. Like the most recent one they did on the last album with Glenn Hughes was called, it was a cover of Humble Pie song called 30 Days in the Hole.
Yeah, I love that tune.
Yeah,
great song.
And that's another case where these guys took a great classic and they just really owned it and made it their own.
Yep, very good.
And, I really had fun doing this tonight, Joe, because, like is so often the case in doing these shows. I, of course, was aware of Nazareth, like you said, and I'm guilty of this myself. When I think of Nazareth, Love Hurts, Hair of a Dog, those are my two songs I come up with instantly. But I had fun listening to some of these other songs, maybe for the first time. It's almost like listening to a new album. I went on YouTube and I was researching some of their music. And it's almost like hearing some of these songs for the very first time, with fresh ears.
Yeah, they've got a lot of great albums. A few of my favorites besides Hair of the Dog were Expect No Mercy in 77, No Mean City in 79, and Malice in Wonderland in 1980. It just seems like that they were in a really good writing groove back in that time frame there. They were firing on all cylinders. Just a great band, and they lost members along the way, like every band. Like I said, now they're down to just one surviving member, the bass player, Pete Agnew. So they released an album this year called Surviving the Law. So if you haven't listened to it, give it a chance, give it a listen. Like I said, me personally, it's not my taste. Yeah. But I'm glad to see that they're still out there playing. They're still out there making music. That's what matters,
And that's
awesome. Awesome to see that.
I tip the hat to these guys for that because, like I was saying, when it comes to record companies and people, behind the scenes, they're all into, they're all into, Nazareth. It's the legacy. You guys just go out and play the greatest hits. But the fact that they're continuing, even if it's not your cup of tea, rather than just living off the glory days and the greatest hits, they're going out there and putting new music out for their fans.
Exactly. Yep. And that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Pleasing the fans.
Yeah, and they obviously have fans for that reason. Continue to follow the band, maybe, and I think they've had the kind of career that they're always going to have like the diehards that have been with them since day one, or for many years. And then like any other band, each new CD you put out, people are discovering you for the very first time. Even a band like Kiss has been around 50 years now. People are just discovering the band, for the first time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So, Joe, did you enjoy your holiday? I hope.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a good time to stop and think about all the things that you do have instead of all the things you wish you had and all the stress in your life.
Yeah.
Just be grateful and be appreciative and thankful for what we do have. There's a lot of people that have a whole lot less. Yeah,
and then see, I guess Nazareth too. And listening to some of these songs last night, what I came to realize, besides just the best stuff like coming from out of the 70s, but they had some really great music that I don't know why it wasn't a bigger hit or why it wasn't more of it wasn't played on the radio regularly. I mean, a good example of that is a song called Whiskey Drinkin' Woman. I think it's off of Hair of a Dog. It's kind of got a real kind of rock and bluesy feel. So, I mean, they're able to do everything from almost hard rock and metal to like power ballads and even blues and everything in between.
Yeah, very, very, very talented band, absolutely. And if you are one of those people like us, and like a lot of people, and the only thing you know about Nazareth is Hair of the Dog or Love Hurts, then get acquainted with it. Yeah. Spend some time, go online and check it out. Listen to some of the stuff, man. It's phenomenal music out there, and don't let one of these legendary guys like Dan die in vain, man. Go on there and give his music some love, man.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, I'd be interested to find out. I wonder, since, Dan passed away a couple of weeks ago, I wonder how much, like, their record sales have gone up. And what I mean by that is, anytime you have somebody, like a famous musician or somebody die, all of a sudden people go out and buy their records. I heard that the day Eddie Van Halen died, Van Halen record sales went up like 600%. If you can, on the day he died, just that one day.
Yeah, every Van Halen fan or every Eddie fan went out and bought another Van Halen album for sure.
In fact, I heard somebody say, and this just kind of boggles the mind when you think of it. I heard somebody say that, like, okay, everybody thinks that, guys like Jim Morrison, Michael Jackson, Freddie Mercury, Kurt Cobain made a ton of money, and they did, but they actually probably made more money dead than they ever did alive.
Absolutely. That is a fact, my friend. That is a fact. Sad but true.
Yeah. Well, Joe, Yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for tonight, unless you have anything else you want to say. But I want to let people know before we do that we're going to do a special Christmas show about a week from now, and Joe and I are going to find some fun, like metal and hard rock Christmas songs to discuss on the next show. So I look forward to that.
Absolutely, it's going to be a good one. Looking forward to it.
And then and I guess we can get into this during the Christmas show, but one of the things that really gave me the idea to do a Christmas show, Joe, was I was reading something recently where if you're at all a Twisted Sister fan, for years their most popular album was the 1984 one, Stay Hungry. But when Twisted Sister put out a Christmas album a number of years ago, that has now become their best-selling album, beating out Stay Hungry.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, just amazing. So, Joe, you enjoy the rest of your week, and look forward to next Monday. Our John Corabi show will be getting posted, and then the Christmas, and then the one we did tonight's going to be posted probably like 2 weeks after that. So.
Chaotic Riffs Magazine.